Hello, everyone. Today's topic of the Genuine Men's Chat Show is emotional intelligence. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello, hello.
Oh,
Hello.
Hi. What does emotional intelligence mean to each of you? It's such a big concept, and it has so many different areas that have been defined by many experts throughout books and research and podcasts. What does it mean to you, and why is it important as a man?
For me, it is something that basically means that you know that your words and your actions have impact on other people. And I tend to bring it down to putting myself into other people's shoes, but generally it's I think about what I do and what I say in terms of the impact it makes on other people. Um, and that's not something I was born with. That's something that I had to develop over time. And the reason for that was purely to get better at dating. It's simply because my first relationship that I was in, I learned, I was very young, and the girl that I was dating constantly was telling me that I do lots of things wrong. So in the end, I kind of, after we broke up, obviously, I decided I'm gonna become a better human being, a better boyfriend, a better husband material, and just gonna improve myself. I had the dream to become a businessman, so I bought a bunch of books on self-development, on just becoming a better person, becoming the best of myself, and during that process, I had to learn all about empathy. I had to learn about what other people are feeling, what are different perspectives, and body language, all sorts of different things that we do daily that we might not be even aware that we're doing or saying, which creates an impact on us and others. That's for me, basically.
For me, emotional intelligence is a difficult thing to talk about because I think it's something I'm probably very bad at. you know, and but I think as I've got older, I've probably got better at it through just getting knocked about and having experience, and then learning from that experience. So it's very much emotional intelligence for me is very much tied into experience and life experience, and through that gaining understanding. I you know my you know as a kid I was very much into comic books, and then I went to university and I read lots of books, and I thought that maybe emotional intelligence, well, I wasn't even aware that there was such a thing as emotional intelligence, because and the only time I think when I actually did learn more about it and things like empathy and communication and listening was when I broke up in a relationship and thought, what the hell's going on? And what did I do? I went and read a book on it. So I read a book on it, and suddenly I thought, oh, right, there's different ways of listening. And I tried it, and it was like after about 2 weeks, there was this huge revelation. Oh my God, what's happening? Everybody's sounding different. There's other meaning, there's layers of meaning here. What's going on? So I think for me, and I don't know if this is a similar experience for a lot of men, I think men are just generally bad at it. I know I was, and maybe it's just, but I do my best to try and learn as much as I can. Women seem to be just much better at it. I think it's just a female thing. Anyway, that's it.
For me, I think emotional intelligence is how you link up with others. And so, for me, one of the things that has really helped me is my belief. I'm a Christian, and one of the things that we always look at or emphasize is loving our neighbors. Now that is not an easy thing. Sometimes you have to be very careful with who your neighbor is. But again, just like Nadim and Alan have said, it's something that you learn And I think if you're prepared to learn and take that journey, it becomes not easier, but you start to understand. So it's a thing where you learn how to link yourself up with others, but are prepared as well to take lessons, because every person, people are never the same, and the more you engage with people, you realize that they are different. And as long as I think you take on those lessons and learn and be supportive and be prepared to take that journey, then I think it's a good place to be.
I started taking a lot more notice of emotional intelligence working as basically in the field of relationships education. So I managed to ignore it personally for a long time, but certainly looking at how mostly young people moving through from being children into being young adults and into adults, and their handling of romantic and sexual relationships on a sort of social scale as well as the individual scale taught me lots about this. And then when in the 90s it began being seen as a sort of separate sociological or psychological subject, and the books that Daniel Goleman wrote have been massive across the world since the mid-90s. For me, it's been easier to talk to people about this stuff and really to get to grips with how men in particular relate to those around them. Because, Alan, I think it was you were saying about impact. You suddenly realise at some point that you have an impact on other people. And Nadeem, you were saying that women seem better at this. And a lot of the arguments around socialisation of boys and girls say that, and particularly Goleman himself observed that girls are socialised very early to use their voice and to use reason and argument, and in some case, manipulation around what they want. So in a playground, girls will be much better at arguing their case and getting what they want, and the young lads charge in and thump people. There is no argument. They use power in an unsophisticated way. And, as girls and boys move into their teenage years, you see a real lagging behind of guys being able to read a room in terms of guys being able to vocalize what they want and what they need from a situation, because they've not had social training to do it. And for me, the one aspect I think that's really important, I've tried to build it into a lot of work that I've done over the years, is this idea of self-awareness and getting people to realize that they're never going to get their relationships of any kind right if they don't know what their baseline is across a range of feelings and situations, and if they don't know what they want and what they need out of life. It's very, very difficult to succeed in being contented and being happy and being a sort of generous, cooperative human being if you don't know what you want and you don't know what you need to be happy. And I think, men, like we've said, we find that a bit of a problem, because largely, if you're the biggest and loudest in a room, you get listened to most. You get people running off and making your cups of tea for you. So largely, there's not a lot of artifice or cleverness around listening and giving and receiving of emotional currents that are needed till later in life, I suppose. But then, it's a really interesting one, and the elements of it, again, that we've started to talk about through this conversation of impact, You know, how do I make sure that my impact on other people is something that I monitor and I regulate, and that I don't, it's not even so much upset people, because you can't manage that, but how am I responsible for my place in the world, and my relationships and my dealings with people around me, and why is that even important? So for some people it never becomes important, and for others of us, you know, you do want to have a positive impact. And that for me is what emotional intelligence is about, that management of who am I in the world, and how do I relate to those around me in a way that we all do well out of.
Tim, do you think that one of the challenges in terms of the men could be the ego and pride that sometimes stands in the way of us taking these things on board and learning and trying to find our purpose in life? You know, it's that male ego that sometimes stands in the way. It's that pride. Who are you to tell me what to do? You know, that sometimes stands in the way. It's that thing where you think, you know, despite the weaknesses, I know it all. And I think that's where it becomes different between the men and the women. While the men, we've got that, the women are just soaking in everything, and they're, you know, adjusting and flexible with whatever situation they're put in. Do you think that could be one of the reasons why we struggle with emotional intelligence?
I certainly think that there's a competitiveness amongst men that is further forward, if you like. It's more encouraged and allowed and developed as a positive in men, and therefore, yeah, gets in the way of other learning about life. And I think that's the other reason why, as we get older, it becomes, you know, we tend to mature out of it a bit once we realise, actually, you know, that way we were brought up as being the best of everything, that's not true. You know, we're not the best at everything, and you start to find out that when you get some knocks in life. So for me, it's about education and socialisation, and the way that families bring up their sons versus the way they bring up their daughters, and that there's a whole history of chicken and egg around that. You know, why do we want men to be certain ways, and why do we want young women to be certain ways? But certainly, yeah, I think that ego is encouraged in men, definitely, as opposed to humility, which isn't necessarily encouraged very well in women. I think what's encouraged in women is don't be angry, don't be fully human, don't have all your stuff out there because men aren't going to like it. So there's all sorts of reasons for it, but, you know, traditional values of masculinity and ownership and the seat of power, a lot of things all come back to power in gender politics, don't they? So yeah, Michael, I think you're right, and I think there's all sorts of reasons why it's encouraged, and it's sad that it's encouraged so much, because I think a lot of men miss out on being happy until later in life because they don't realise there's different ways of doing things.
From my point of view, it's not just ego. I think it's also a little bit of selfishness, like this being egocentric. I just care about what I feel, what I want, nothing else. And I can tell you that this, like, once you start getting into that rabbit hole and you become like self-aware and you build up the emotional intelligence, it becomes like having a superpower. It's like the secret to everything. It helps so much with business. It helps so much with women. It helps so much with just generally with people. You can see my enthusiasm here. So I'm not gonna lie, it actually allowed me to get a girlfriend that probably otherwise I would not be able to get because of the man I became. And it's almost like stepping outside of the matrix and seeing the world through different sets of eyes. And analyzing what is happening around you, and literally like a superpower, you can decide what is going to happen next. So I give you example of public speaking, or speaking in general. Let's say you're sitting at a table with 6 people. If you're self-aware or you have some kind of emotional intelligence, you realize what people need and what people generally do. Some people will be bored. And if you accept that, you look at the people and be like, oh, that person is bored. So I can see it. I'm going to try to direct my speech towards that person that is bored. Maybe I'll try to lift their spirit. Look somewhere else and you see a person who's kind of like, they are maybe trying to, they're being cold. And you like, oh, that person is being cold. Like you see people's needs that they have, because you're exploring what is going on out there rather than spending most of your time in your head or in your body. So yeah, as I said, when you start exploring those things, what people are hearing, what people are needing physically, mentally. If somebody's scared, if you can feel that somebody's scared, you give them comfort. If you see that somebody's angry, you give them something to calm down. And it's literally like a superpower. That's how I see it. If I'm negotiating with someone, I'm detaching myself and I'm like kind of trying to see who this person is, what they care about. And it really, really works.
And on that sort of subject of empathy, which is what you're talking about, the other important thing for me is the ability to be able to accept the experience of somebody else as valid and not try and change it, or always give them what they need, but to sit in the moment with somebody and it be okay, because we do try to fix things or move things in other people towards an ideal, which isn't always the best for them or for us, really. So for me, one of the important bits of this is to say, right, that's somebody else having their experience and that's okay. That is their experience, and that helps me to try and only take responsibility for my bit, if you like, and allow them to have their responsibility for their own feelings and their own position in the world and their own experience, and rather than do things for them, to allow them to have my reaction, if you like, or my response to where they are, just to be a measuring stick rather than something that needs them to change. And I think that's made it, in some ways, quite difficult to be a parent, because, there's a fine balance with kids of what you need to do for them and how you teach them to be themselves and to have the pain of growing into experiences, so that they're equipped themselves to deal with it. So for me, one of the downsides, I suppose, of knowing this stuff and having thought about it, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to being somebody that says, I don't care, this is how it's going to be and I'm just doing it my way.
Oh yes,
so
I've been there too. Yeah.
One of the struggles for me is, trying to get this right with kids under 10 who are rapidly approaching that sort of fixed way of thinking, and to try and get in there quick with openness and self-awareness and acceptance of others and all this stuff. So it's a burden as well as a blessing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Tim is saying there, and I look back on my younger self with real embarrassment. But I guess it's just part of a process where I guess you become more aware. But I guess there's that just gaining that experience. But again, it's getting that experience without having to go through the trauma of something would be great. I mean, I just but without that trauma, I don't know whether I would have had any kind of real stimulus to actually learn whatever it is I needed to learn. And maybe in terms of my education, it would be if I could teach younger people that instead of a place you have to get to, because as I was growing up, it was always about doing rather than being. You know, it was always about doing something, doing the exams, doing the job, getting that. Even the girl was getting the girl, and you know, forget that they're a human being with other emotions and a mind. No, it was just getting that. I've got a girl, you know, and I wish I'd realized that it was about being and being myself. And people always said that. They always said that in movies, didn't they? Just be yourself. And it's taken me now to understand what the hell they were on about when they said that. What do you mean, be yourself? You know. So anyway, I wish there was some way to get young boys to understand that, even myself at that age, what that means to be yourself, and that people will actually like you for that. People will actually respond to that. Be yourself, you know. So anyway, that's all I can say about that.
I like the concept of being your best self.
Being
So
yourself.
basically you do everything you can to bring that good side of you, that positive side, or having positive impact on others. That helps more than just broadly saying be yourself.
I think for me, it's understanding your purpose. When you understand your purpose, then you're able to have that impact with the people around. I think sometimes because we struggle to understand our purpose, that's the reason why we struggle with the relationships. We end up making mistakes here and there, and we're looking to be something else that we are not, and so it causes a bit of confusion. But if you understand your purpose, because I believe that every single one of us has got a purpose. Every single one of us has got a reason as to why they are Earth. And so if we understand that purpose, then we're able to have that impact with people around us. We are able to support the people around us. We are able to guide those that are around us purely because we understand my purpose. We understand our purpose.
I actually am happy to admit that I think I'm very bad at dealing with emotional intelligence. But one thing I have realized over the years is that, you know, it's, I think one thing is understanding the kind of emotional sort of weather that somebody else is going through, but also trying to understand the emotional weather that you yourself are going through. So I think there's this, for me, there's definitely two parts to it. And I think, you know, and I don't know, I mean, I'm no expert in this, but I wonder whether you can really understand what somebody else is going through until you've experienced that situation or that emotion yourself, and not just experienced it, but I think distinguished it. You know, if one, you know, I think we all experience emotions, but there's a point where you suddenly get what that emotion is and what that was. So that's something that I think, and for me, that's, I think probably for most people, I would think it's a work in progress. I just, as a guy, I just noticed that my wife is so much better at it than I am. And most women seem to be better at it than most men. I know people talk about women's intuition, but I always think that simply means that they're just able to read things better. And I think that, I mean, I'm going to sound really old fashioned now, but I think that's why women are better at being mothers than men. Because they're in tune with that, and I don't know whether that's just a natural biological thing, or women are just more, you know, are just trained amongst other women to do that. I think it must be a biological thing, but anyway, that's my bit on it.
Yeah. And there's so much of that I think I can definitely relate to. I definitely think that it's a like ongoing journey, and that you become kind of more and more emotionally aware through each kind of often through quite like traumatic experiences. Sometimes you suddenly realize that there's something that you've done, or there's something that you've not done, and you really start to empathize. And I think that's where a lot of the emotional intelligence eventually comes from, is that you're able to understand and empathize with where they've come from. And that's not always about agreeing. And I think that's been a big thing in my like progression, is feeling like I maybe can't emotionally relate because I don't agree with the facts, or I don't agree with the situation, but remembering that you don't have to agree to be empathetic as to why they feel that way. I mean, I definitely think that that was not my early life experience at all, and that like you asked Reham, where did this come from? And I think that it came from getting it wrong constantly, and then trying to compute why the response I was getting was not the one I thought I should be getting, and then trying to develop more and more depth to that, I suppose. And then also being honest with yourself, I think sometimes, and I recognize that I think we're all a bit odd, we're all a bit strange, and we all do things that are a bit irrational and crazy sometimes. And I think relating that back to the fact that I have to empathize, because if someone was to judge me in my most, like when I do something a bit unusual, then I'd hope that they'd be able to appreciate that too. So it's, and that's, I think, back to, what Dr. Reham said about yourself, about Dr. Nadim, sorry, about the, about being compassionate and kind of aware of yourself as well is important. But I also think, for me this year as well, I think that no doubt when like things like the Me Too movement come along, it makes you question. I think when the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly this year, again, it makes you confront yourself, and it makes you ask yourself, are you doing enough? Are you being as empathetic as you thought you were being? And I think that's it, is that that's what you have to just continually do, is just keep checking yourself and realizing that there's more to learn.
I agree. And what I want to say is, like, especially when you said that you learn about this stuff when you get things wrong. And those moments are very painful. Dr. Nadine, you also mentioned that, like, and Reham, you did too. Sometimes it's like those traumatic experiences, and I'll give you a perfect example for that. Previously, I mentioned that, I started to learn and experience that in order to become better at dating, because my first girlfriend was pointing out the wrong things that I was doing in my life, and then I wanted to attract a girl, and I noticed the better I get with emotional intelligence, the better I get with girls in general. But that wasn't really what caused the dramatic change that happened over the past few years for me. What that was a conversation with a friend that I had, a male friend, at a bar. We had a beer, and we were drinking a beer together. We worked together in a restaurant, and we had a beer together, and we sit there. We're quite close friends. And he says to me, "You know what? Nobody at work likes you."
Wow.
And like, it's also almost like a slap in the face. I felt like an unbelievable pain, and I was in shock, because to my mind, I'm a good person. I didn't hurt anyone ever. And I felt inside of me, in my mind, I thought people do like me. I'm not trying to people to like me, but I'm a person to be, that people would enjoy to be around, and that, people are not pretending anything when they're around me, and just generally, just those positive things that I think a person would just think about themselves. And then he shattered my world with those words. And what happened, especially, there was some people at work that I really liked, and I felt like maybe they could be my really good friends, and that we're getting along, and that we're having fun. And in that moment, it made me think that maybe those interactions that we have at work are kind of fake, that those people are pretending the smiles and they're not really who they say they are. And yeah, and so in that moment, it was like this pain. The reality was completely destroyed. And for about few days, it shook me so much that for a few days I was trying to understand, like, how is this possible? And I was, as I was going to work, I was trying to observe people, and I was asking my friend, can you tell me what is wrong? What am I doing wrong that people are feeling this way? And then he gave me some examples. He said, well, you are a talker. You talk a lot and you don't follow through on what you say, what you do. And then there are certain things that you say or certain things that you do at work that, don't consider people's emotions or don't consider people's situation or whatever. And he gave me a perfect example for that. Which was every day at lunchtime, we would get served our food. I was a waiter, and we would get served our food. And after I finished, I would go to the place where they wash dishes. And, we had a person who worked there washing dishes. Funny enough, not long ago, I was washing dishes myself. But in that moment where I finished my meal and I wanted to put those dishes away, I didn't have to. I could have simply washed the dishes myself, or at least acknowledge the person who's going to wash the dishes after me. And I didn't. I just chucked them there like I was, they were supposed to, that was their job to wash those dishes. And without consideration for that person's feelings, because yes, that's their job, but at the same time, they don't have to really clean after me. They clean after the customers. And, I just gave them some more work to do. So he told me, if you consider this person, he's washing dishes and you don't even look at him, that he's going to wash those dishes for you, he's going to feel really bad. And he's going to hate you for that. And it reached me, the information got through finally. And I started to realize, wow, there are things that I do that, yes, absolutely could, make people feel this way. So I took it almost like a mission afterwards to fix everything that I'd broken over that time. And it took some time, and I had to swallow the guilt and just kind of work really, really hard to recover. And then maybe it took me about a month or two. But then people started slowly talking with each other, and I overheard some voices saying, "Did you see that Alan changed, so much? He started to improve and did better things." So I liked the feedback, and I also kind of really realized that maybe there's other things that I can improve. And I took it up on myself. I was starting to reading. I did other things. Over the years to kind of become better with people. And now after those years, that was like 7 years ago, I'm not saying I'm super amazing and great, but I'm definitely much more self-aware. And even though, yes, there are experiences that I couldn't really totally relate to because I didn't go through them, I can get pretty close. I really developed some empathy and some understanding towards people. And I'm really proud of that. I think it's very useful in life. It helps in my job because I film people. So I need to understand what people are going through and I film them. And in general, that was the kind of journey, but it started with pain. And I think it's very important to know that.
And I think you made a really good point about like having to like surrender something for yourself, like your ego, often been like having to accept something that actually initially feels really, really, like really harsh, and actually probably wasn't delivered in the most emotionally intelligent way. But even still, you're just, confronting the fact that, that I need to surrender my ego in order to move forward. And I think it's really funny because only for me in the last couple of years have I learned the absolute power of like controlling my own ego. And that, like, if I surrender my ego first, then I remain in control of the situation. And it's actually something that people are really afraid of because it's this perception. But you've got control over the situation almost all the time, even when it feels really difficult. And that doesn't mean that in the moment you've always got control, but it's that time to like step back and reflect on it. I think that's been one of the biggest kind of the ability to see situations progress towards the positive outcome has often resulted from a decision I've taken personally rather than something I've forced someone else to submit or to prove that I was right and that they were wrong. That it ultimately ends up not being sustainable.
I mean, just absolutely, all of that rings absolutely true. And when you were saying that, Alan, about this person saying to you that nobody likes you, I mean, that really hit me, because to be told something like that is like that's like a hammer blow. And I don't know. I was kind of curious as to whether you asked for the information or whether it just came as, he just said it. I mean, or whether you were looking for some sort of feedback or kind of acknowledgement, or.
I didn't ask for it. I didn't ask for it. I think it just came out just because we were, after a few beers, we were just talking about work, about people. And just, by the way, I think nobody likes it. I don't remember exactly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember this stuck with me for a very long time. It really hurt.
I get it. I mean, the thing was that resonated with me this week, because I had a strange experience where I got you get these WhatsApp groups and people send you these kind of invitations to various groups, and I got an invitation from my old school. Now, I used to go to I'm not going to mention the school's name, but it was a grammar school. It was a fee-paying school. And at the time that I went there, I was the only brown-skinned Asian kid in the whole year. I went from a school, it was like a comprehensive state school where, there were loads of people like me. We were having a laugh. We were like, I wouldn't say feral, but we just didn't feel self-conscious or anything. And then suddenly I went to this school where there were all these very middle-class kids whose parents would go to Switzerland at the holidays to ski and stuff like that. And, they were, their parents were whatever they were. I mean, that's the stereotype, but they had a lot more resources than I did at that time. And I was the only Asian kid. And I found it quite difficult initially to just fit in. I did fit in, and eventually it was all about getting the exams, and I got through. So anyway, I got this WhatsApp group. They added me on, and suddenly I had a few interactions with a few of the people from that era. And we're talking now people in the 70s, 70s, maybe early 80s, that kind of thing. And I suddenly started getting these really angry feelings, and I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And then what I realized was that when I went to that school, I feel like I had to kind of kill off a part of me to, in other words, to get on with everybody. So I had to kind of, I don't know, funnily enough, I think maybe, was it emotional intelligence or was it just survival? So I had to survive, I had to be a certain way.
Yeah. So this is a funny thing that is part of my like emotional intelligence like development process, is that I only got a co-founder a few years ago, and it's a thing I've had to learn, which is to not interrupt, because it's a thing, and I almost have gone so far in the other direction that I literally wait till people are completely finished speaking, and it's something I almost need to train myself out of in social situations, which require more like jumping in. But I'm so used to meetings being like, I will say nothing until I'll let them say everything they want to say, and then I'll speak. But I've only adopted that in the last like 2 years probably.
It's interesting because you say that, because it's like I find myself in similar situations. Like, you're too self-aware just like you're so self-aware that you know exactly what's happening, that you know all your shortcomings and all the things that you're doing wrong. One of them could be the interrupting people, that you will never ever ever interrupt person ever again, and you just kind of limit yourself in interactions because you don't want to do that. And it's kind of like, you know, very meta situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's finding the middle ground. I think that's what all this is about ultimately, is that it's not about, you know, there is like, you know, everything's on like a spectrum. So like, you know, there is no absolute point. And I think that learning that is that, you know, sometimes you fall back, you know, into an extreme, and, you know, and in order to kind of climb your way back into some level of kind of middle. Yeah, exactly.
Whatever normal is.
Yeah, or a new normal, you know, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I think that's and I think that's the thing is the thing I've learned is not to be too harsh on myself, because when you are quite self-aware, you can find yourself being really self-critical, and I think that that's something that I catch myself doing, is saying, like, in my head, saying some really quite like unkind things. I'm like, I would never say this out loud to another person. So I don't know why I've just said it to myself, and I'm trying to catch myself doing that, and trying to give myself a break sometimes.
You bring up such a powerful point, and the program that I'm running right now, it's a 6-week program on exactly that. It's about catching yourself and building your resilience around the messages that we tell ourselves. So this is part of the self-awareness component of emotional intelligence. When we speak to ourselves in such a negative way, that we all do, catching ourselves is so important, because what it does is it breaks the cycle. It's a pattern interrupt, as they call it. And what happens is when you interrupt that pattern, you create a different neural response. So your brain then processes it in a different way. It almost can, if you do it often enough, it will create a new pathway in your brain. So the connection that we have with the negative thoughts and the negative self-criticism or self-judgment that we direct to ourselves becomes the less paved road, and the Autobahn that's created becomes the new one, because we're practicing again and again to create that solid foundation of, I am worthy, I am better, I am my best friend. I could not say this to my best friend, therefore I will not allow myself to say it to me. And creating those boundaries of self-compassion and self-protection is so essential. Again, it's all about balance, because what can happen is our ego kicks in. And so it's that balance between, am I being egotistical and prideful, or am I really balancing the equation so that I'm investing in my own mental well-being? And when my mental well-being is impacted, then I know that I'm not speaking or dealing with myself in a compassionate way. And that's counterintuitive to the emotional intelligence that we offer others and ourselves. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, like, I think that social kind of norms can make that really difficult sometimes, because when so I know, like, you know, growing up, the social norm was to put each other down all the time, and to be self-critical, and to be really hypercritical of everybody else as well. You know, if someone wasn't doing the right thing, you know, you got social points for telling everyone first that they had it wrong. And so when you're so used to giving that out, then you don't even notice it when you're giving it to yourself. And then you stop even noticing it sometimes when other people are giving it to you. And you just completely normalize a really toxic like attitude. And then it becomes just like it becomes your expectation for relationships. And you see it on repeat again and again. And it takes sometimes a really hard like moment for you to almost snap out, and then be like, you know, suddenly you've got a bit of perspective, and you can see it for the first time. And then it's all this stuff is very confronting. And I think that's the hard bit. So I guess that's why sometimes we don't deal with it, is because it is very confronting, and it requires a lot of emotional energy.
Absolutely. I know, Dr. Nadim, you mentioned earlier that sometimes women seem to have more emotional intelligence than men. it's all about practice. I can guarantee you that research has shown and proven that women are socialized, as in programmed and conditioned, to be more emotionally intelligent. However, what happens is we tell our children, our boys to be specific, when they're about 4 or 5, don't cry, man up, hide your emotions in whatever messages that it comes in. And then we tell them when they become teenagers, no, show your emotions. No, exhibit those feelings that you have. Articulate your emotions. But they've lost that skill. They've been sensitized to their own emotions, that they're only mirrors of other people's. And like you were saying, Dr. Nadim, you kind of had to wear masks when you were in school so that you can survive. That is what I think potentially could deplete someone's emotional intelligence, because you're such on survival mode. Your brain waves, the hormones that are gushing through our bodies, the adrenaline that continues to pump, and the cortisol diminishes our ability to learn, our ability to retain memory around issues that we've experienced that cause us trauma or cause us difficulty. So what happens is, and I know you're the doctor, so you're going to fill us in on this in more detail, but from my humble knowledge and reading and learning, I've realized that the more we invest in ourselves with compassion, as we were saying earlier, Bruce and Alan, and we're more aware of how we interact, and it's that split second moment where you can choose to continue the habitual social pattern of being on autopilot and chastising or belittling or even ganging up on, verbally bullying other people, and being and letting that be the way that we practice one-upsmanship as a method of alpha male syndrome, I'd like to say, so that we're the macho man. We're showing that we are, obviously I'm not a man, but we, as in the men that I work with, often talk about, we are proving our worth. But is that really worth? I'd love to hear your input.
Are you saying that is it worth doing that? Is that the question you were asking?
Two-pronged. So is it worth doing it? What's the cost to men, when you do this? And then the second approach would be, or the second way to look at it would be, well, is this common amongst men to appear as the alpha male? It's almost like when a man walks into a room, they're almost like they're spreading their shoulders wider to just create a space of, figuratively obviously, to show that they're the alpha male, so that there aren't attacks, there isn't the bullying, there isn't the the demeaning behavior coming their way. And I've heard this repeatedly again and again and again from boys and men. So I'm just curious to know what each of your experiences are. And Dr. Nadim, from a medical perspective, what are your thoughts as well?
Well, I don't necessarily know from a medical perspective, but I'm a GP, so I'm not, I can't tell you about the scientific endorphins and things that are going through, but I can tell you that, my waiting room, at least once a month, two or three times a month, I'll have some mother that will bring her little kid in who's being bullied at school, and now actually what I'm finding older girls coming in who are being cyberbullied, which is of course something new, and some of it is actually horrific, where they're being filmed and then this is being passed around, and I've had this quite a few times now, and I think from my own experience of the whole playground and being bullied, and then I think I got cut off when I was talking about my school, but I was the only Asian kid in the whole school, and I think there is something about the predatory nature of the playground, and maybe that's the way I see it, but and it may be just the way that I see it, but where if you're genuinely open and you have your defenses down, you're going to be literally sniffed out by these predatory bullies. And unfortunately, yeah, I mean, in that situation, you, I suppose, have to put on, eventually you realize that you have to put on some kind of suit of armor, or, strong suit. And I had to do that in my own experience, where I had to put that on. And it was basically, I had to learn to be physically tougher. I did martial arts. I looked at Bruce Lee as a a role model, and Muhammad Ali, and I had to literally punch someone to survive. Now, all of that's great, and it solves a kind of short-term problem, because suddenly you're not getting bullied. But the problem is, you forget why you put that suit of armor on in the first place, and so then you're walking around hyper vigilant, and you're walking around, thinking that that's how you solve problems. And of course, it doesn't work that way, and it doesn't work in every situation. And this is the problem, I think, with I think whether girls are socially conditioned, but I just find they have a quicker turnaround. They're able to see where that emotion works and it doesn't work. My wife says that, women are just much more manipulative, and they're able to, because they have to be. Because they have to be, and you may disagree, but she says, well, we have to be, in order to get along and to survive, and I think sometimes, I wondered what she meant, and I thought, well, in Britain, if you're on your own, yeah, there's the welfare state, people are going to pay you X amount of money to get by, but if all of those supports are taken away, what would we have to rely on? So I do wonder whether, you say they're socialized, maybe women have to be more than men. And anyway, in my own situation, I think with that, I think the problem is that you find that strong suit, that suit of armor that works in that playground situation with that bully. And unfortunately, you forget that you put that suit of armor on. You forget that that's the defense mechanism you created for a specific need. And unfortunately, then, it doesn't work when you're in a relationship with somebody and you have to be empathetic to, your wife or your girlfriend or whoever, or even your mother. And I think this is the problem with guys, that if they don't learn how to put that suit of armor on, I feel that they're just going to be, oh God, almost eaten alive. And then, but I suppose it's about teaching them that, look, it works in this situation, but you don't have to do that everywhere. I guess that's the thing.
Honestly, I think that I couldn't relate more to that as a kind of like, I think, Rehan, we were talking just the other day, and I explained school as prison rules. And that's how, I mean, it's like, my partner studied criminology, so we watched a lot of prison related documentaries, and every time I look at it, I go, prison is just a very extreme version of some of the social expectations in school. It's things like, as you were saying, if you show a certain level of vulnerability, then you are vulnerable to either verbal or physical attacks. Attacks is a strong word, and it comes on a spectrum, but you have to be responsive to that. And I certainly know that in my experience is that, Riam, you were talking about the alpha male and that kind of expectation. Well, my school life embodied that. That's what I tried to be, very much so. And, I very much built up the characteristic that I felt I needed to survive in what was a rough school. That I came from a slightly nicer area of the areas, and the other areas that were there were actually exceptionally deprived areas, which makes for quite a mix when you've got some very affluent areas coming together with very, and that's the story of Scotland's catchment areas and schools, right? And so having to manage in that environment, knowing that in myself that I'm actually quite an emotional, creative person, is that I then manifested that as someone who, I wasn't afraid to to get into an argument. I wasn't afraid to get into my go-to was very verbal. I was exceptionally argumentative and exceptionally good at it as well, you know, and I felt like I was good at it anyway. And, you know, that model of dominance is so prevalent, and you feel under an intense amount of pressure to do that. And so, you know, physical fights in school were not uncommon for me, because if someone was to confront me, then that was an attack on my ego. That was an attack on how I viewed myself in school. It's an attack on how I thought other people viewed me. And if I did not respond to that, then I felt like I was in danger one way or another. And, you know, I remember this time when I ended up in an argument with someone, frequently people who are older than me, unfortunately. And actually happened to be an older girl within the school. And her response was to then tell me, you know, who she was going to get to batter me, basically. And that's actually, in my context at that time, a pretty serious threat that she was levying against me. But I wasn't someone to then just like, you know, I wasn't going to fall back into the shadows. So my response was to go full pelt into this situation. And anyway, it escalated to this guy who was older than me, confronting me in the school. And it managed to get broken up because it happened at lunch. But then for the rest of the day, this guy intimidated me. When he walked past me in the hallway, he would bang into me and he would throw me about. And it was very, very, very intense for me for that day. The following day, I didn't tell anyone at home about it, but I went home and I was anxious all night, except it worked me up to an absolute frenzy. And I thought, I'm doing something about this tomorrow, one way or another. And I drew upon what my very Scottish grandfather used to say, which was, and it's not advice I follow now, I have to say, but it was win, lose or draw, fight. And that was his message to me, which is that it's not about winning, it's about confronting. And, you know, the next day I went into this guy, it was at the break time, didn't tell anybody else, but went to confront the guy. And the key was not telling anyone else, because had I told everyone else that I planned on confronting him, then everyone would have got up and a crowd would have followed me outside, and it would have been a much bigger theatre experience. Instead, I went up to the guy and just said, "What's our problem?" And he must have decided in that moment that he no longer wanted a problem. And I definitely didn't want a problem. And he just said, "Shall we just be sound?" And I just went, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." And it was a moment of when, outside of the theatre of it all, when it was just the two of us having a conversation and actually just saying, do we want this to escalate? Do we want this to be anything more? And it's so funny, I think, seeing two boys who are fighting over some kind of alpha thing suddenly being in a position where neither of us want this. Neither of us want to be in this situation. And that if, when, you know, in private, you were able to just end it, and that was it, faded away into the distance. Never had an issue with the gent again, and that was the end of it. But I think that as I've developed is realizing, how do you confront those situations without that response? And actually, it's like you never have to get into it. There's so much you can relent to early on that maybe doesn't enable that. But I think that I wouldn't know anything about who I am today had I not been through those what feel like very scary and intense moments, and feeling physically confident enough to do something about it. And that for me as a man is still important to me. I think that I feel confident and strong as physically strong and confident and emotionally strong and confident. And those two things are the thing that give me a very quiet, genuine confidence where I don't actually know. I no longer feel like I need anyone to know, because I've convinced myself. And that's actually all that really matters to me now.
I mean, I can totally relate to what you say. I think we are very similar in those kind of scenarios. It's not just school. It sometimes happens to me now. I tend to go play football quite often, and they get some, you know, heated situation on that football field. And since I'm very passionate about it, I tend to sometimes go a little bit overboard with aggression. And we get to points where there is almost fighting, or sometimes there is some fighting happening with the boys. And it's interesting what you said about, like, sometimes you come to this rational conclusion, like, do I want this to happen? Because I was never afraid to stand up to someone who is bigger and stronger. I'm quite short, I'm skinny, and even if it's someone who is bigger, I think it's about the courage. So you had the courage to stand up to that guy without the theater, like you said, and all that nonsense, and that gave some respect, in the eyes of that guy. That created like a sense of respect, and and I think that is important, to have the courage to stand up for yourself. But going back to like the emotional intelligence part of it, is that I think it's all about the balance. So yes, I believe certainly there's like a macho thing going on there. Guys are trying to show the dominance, who is higher, and trying each other, making standoffs and being like, yeah, I want to punch you. Yeah, you want to punch me? Yeah, I want to punch you. Okay, so let's go. And then get right into each other's face, and then obviously nothing happens, right? So that's quite common. It's quite we've seen this so many times, right? And then you start to think, in that moment you have to make a decision. Am I following it through? What's going to happen? And so on. And so when emotional intelligence, for me, it comes up to that moment where or even self-regulation. I think that's what you would lead to, Riham, is when you can, in that moment, you can stop yourself and think, what is the consequences of that, for you and for the other person, and how far this can go. Because like for me, and I admit, sometimes it still happens to me to this day, when I get really, I heat up in a moment, and I'm on my way. I'm on my way with my hand up, right? And in that moment, you start to think, what's going to happen? What consequences could this lead to? And then maybe if you're on the street, if that person's got a knife, if there's someone with you, that you're gonna risk their safety, where the environment you're in. So you kind of have to control yourself, and this is like very like split second, very fast information, very fast thinking process. And I think it's important to have balance. And last time I said having emotional intelligence is like having superpower. I think in this case, maybe with the women being better at it, I would maybe even consider this like another language, like learning another language. And if a guy can learn that, it's almost like he's speaking another language that he could use to speak with women and other people. And I think parents should potentially teach their kids this language. So like literally as a parent, like a father or a mother, sit down with your boy and be like, now we're going to talk about what is happening in this other person's life or head. And this is what they are thinking or might be thinking. These are the consequences of blah, blah, blah. And just kind of go through this kind of stuff like they will be learning a language.
That's interesting what you're saying there, Alan, about teaching the young children, because I think, I've got a 10-year-old, and I remember that when he was at nursery, they did, or primary 1, I think, or primary 2, they were talking about emotions, and he came back saying to me something about, oh, you've hurt my feelings, and it was like a new thing he'd discovered, and I went, what? So I think there is something that is being recognized now, at least I hope it is. But certainly when I was growing up, there wasn't any of that at all. Even the word, you've hurt my feelings, it just wouldn't have come up at all.
But that applies usually when somebody, it applies like these days, it's thrown so much around that it almost makes you considered as a weak person if somebody hurt your feelings. Now, what I'm thinking is more like, if I have that standoff with a guy who I was playing football, and I'm like literally going at it, and then we nothing happens, we finish the game, and I'm going home, I think, what was this guy thinking? Like, what would that mean to him? What has been going on wrong in his life that he got to this point where he did such thing? He said something to me, did he mean it, and so on. And because of that, it makes it easier not to then follow through with any threats or anything that, like violence or anything. Right?
Yeah.
It's funny because you're saying that there. It made me think about when, like, a thing that used to drive me mad is that my mum would constantly say to me, I would be complaining about someone, and then she'd always take the other person's side, and that's how I perceived it. But actually, Alan, as you were just speaking there, it made me think is that actually what she was doing is trying to, like, get me to empathize with where that person was coming from. But in your youth, you perceive that as you're just not listening, you're taking their side. But I think the interesting thing is that if you'd read, even though you might not, young people might not show that they get it at the time, is how these lessons come back to be really valuable to you as you're an adult, and then you can actually reflect on them.
When you were talking about this, it reminds me of a thing that happened recently. When I was at school, I had 3 epic fights with this guy who was about 6 foot back then. So, and I remember at the time, I got a certain amount of recognition for it because I took on this really big guy. But the funny thing was, we met up at a reunion about 10 years ago. And the first thing he said was, forgive me, and started talking about some stuff. And I could see that something had changed and everything. And literally about a month ago, I managed to get his number from somewhere. I called him and I was talking about some of the things that happened. And it was like, a revelation. He started telling me about how, he had a very bad situation at home. His dad and mum and dad were getting divorced. He just didn't have, he had all sorts of things going on. And at the end of it, we ended up saying, when you're up in Glasgow, come and stay with me. And he's got 3 boys and I've got 3 boys and all this kind of thing. So it's just a shame that it takes that length of time to get to that. So I think, definitely what you're both saying about learning to look at it from the other person's perspective. And yeah, maybe if you see it as a superpower or a talent or just a skill, guys like to have skills. So maybe if we look at it as a skill that we can learn, maybe that's something that we could take on. I suppose a lot of it comes down to communication, doesn't it? And the first part of communication being listening. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to go with the stereotype, whenever a man talks about a topic with someone else, it's about fixing it, for example, especially if it's their partner. So how can I fix this for you? Instead of fixing it, the technique that would be really amazing would be, well, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's look at it from, this perspective. Like Alan was talking about,
I like to say, I'm going to try to understand it. So it's kind of like, I'm not even going to try to put myself in the other person's shoes. I'm just going to try to understand that person. Like, why are they doing something? Or why are they saying something?
Yeah, it's the humanization of the other. They might be the other because they're the person that you fought 3 times, Dr. Nadim, or Bruce, the person that was about to create trauma or drama in school, or Alan, whatever it was at work that was creating that friction for you to make you feel like, empathy might have not been the first thought on your mind at the time for whatever reason. Autopilot is a quick defense mechanism to not making choices and making conscious decisions in our lives. And so when we are on autopilot, we don't have to be responsible. We don't have to be accountable.
The idea of this is brilliant. And I do think that teaching young kids assertiveness would really go a long way, because we're in such fixed structures that move so slowly towards change. So, the fixed expectations of our elders and betters and structures in the world, like to say, you should be this certain way, you should do this certain thing, you should live your way this way, and you should look like you fit in with what's going on. And that comes back to tribalism, doesn't it, I suppose, in some ways, and it also comes back very much to capitalism. But trying to help kids sort out their own path within that, for me, is very tricky. And like Nadeem, I look back at some of the stuff I did as a kid and think, what the hell was I doing? A different path would have been so much easier and got me to a different place much quicker. And largely, in my defense, I think some of that was to do with the expectations that had been placed on me by different structures in my life. So for me, yeah, if we're talking about emotional intelligence, starting with the self is great. Trying to be your best self is another way of expressing it that's fairly modern. But assertiveness is really key in a lot of this. Knowing what you want, knowing what you need, knowing how to negotiate that with other people, that allows you to balance their wants and needs with yours and take responsibility for those. So yeah, if everybody goes off and reads some books about assertiveness, I'd be really, really happy.
I agree. Assertiveness, definitely. One thing that I would definitely recommend doing is learning how to listen. If you are a man, learn how to listen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that changes everything once you learn how to listen. And in order to give you a practical tip how to do this, I recommend doing something like this. You can try it anytime you want. Whoever is listening to it, if someone is telling you a story or telling you what happened during the day, if it's your wife, if your girlfriend, or whoever, to tell you a story, or you hear on TV or whatever, try to picture that person. Let's say somebody tells you a story that they moved from Poland to Scotland, and they tell you about this experience. You picture, as that person is telling the story, you picture that person in your mind, and you picture what they felt, how the whole experience went, what they had to do. Did they have to speak to their parents? Did they have to ask them the questions? What did you feel? Have you been scared? Did you have all the money? Like, try to think of all the things that could go wrong, that person could have felt, was afraid of, or might have experienced. And then you open that person up, and then they start to even share more experiences and data with you, and then you kind of remember more what they said. So they get to be heard, and they appreciate that. I use that a lot with my girlfriend. So I get really into the stuff that she tells me. So she would tell me the most boring story from work ever, and I'll be like, yes. And then what he said, and no. And I'm like, I know girls do this a lot, and I'm not faking it. I am genuinely interested. Okay. I want to know, what did this guy say? No. That's not what he was supposed to do. This. And when there's something frustrating, I would get angry, and I'm like, no, I can't believe you did that, and just get involved in this. And because of that, she feels heard. And if you can make other person feel heard, that makes a big difference in that person's life.
Alan, thank you so much for that tip. I'm going to take that on board. And I think I'm going to do that more on my wife, who is sat in the same room as me, and listening to everything that you've said. So I'm going to really take that on board. So thank you.
I wherever you got that from, I need to buy that book. I'm just going to say just now that what I can think is, for, I don't know, maybe sometimes I think it's too late for me. No, actually, that's not true. But what I think is I really wish that, and I hope that at school now, young boys are being taught communication skills and some way of actually putting those into practice. I hope that happens. I don't know. I'd be surprised if it isn't. but I really hope that that is happening now at school, and that's something that I think would be great. It would be a real breakthrough.
And if it's not, invest in your children's learning.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, I pretty much agree as well. Is that I think it's not a thing that you have, it's a thing that you like do. You know, it's a thing that has continuously been done, and you can forget to do it sometimes. And it's like you're working at it all the time. It's like a muscle. You know, you're constantly trying to work the muscle to be more and more emotionally intelligent. And I think you need to be aware that you need to have enough emotional reserves to be really good at it, because if you're drained and you're exhausted even sometimes, then you're less likely to be able to empathize in such the same way, because you've not got the capacity. So it's like being considerate of all these different factors that influence it, so that you're not worried about being perfect at it all the time. Because I think that's such a man thing, is that if I'm going to do it, I need to be great at it, and giving yourself a hard time for not doing it best. And it's like just coming to terms with the fact that you can't be great at it all the time. I think for me, I feel like I get my emotional depth comes with every kind of new experience, and so it's still evolving, and it's still kind of growing in things. And I think the thing that really triggered it for me, and a big shift, was having a long-term relationship. That for me was the biggest shift in my mind, where suddenly I realized that the last thing I ever wanted to do was to make this person feel anything other than great. So when I was then doing something, my response was inducing a worse response. That was the real motivation for me to think, like, this is not nice. You know, whether I realize it, that's their truth, and kind of adapting to that. So I think, you know, that's my kind of take on it, is that it's something that you have to continually work on. You can learn from everybody. There's no one you can't learn from when it comes to, I think, developing your emotional intelligence. And those people that are the hardest to be kind of empathetic with are the ones you learn the most.
From my point of view, like as an adult, like especially I relate to the relationship part. It helps a lot when you focus on the other person in the relationship, and you make them like you start to think, what could you do, or what could you stop doing in order for this person to feel good or not feel bad. And in terms of like the what we could do for the future, like I'm not a parent, so obviously I wouldn't give people advice, but I can imagine it would be really cool to have like maybe a game with the kid where you are out and about, and you just kind of maybe try to do some people watching with them, and just kind of ask, what do you think this person is like? What this person is doing for a living, and what do you think they can be going through in their mind, or whatever, like what kind of profession they have, what kind of life they have, and they kind of start to imagine that there are other people in the world, and they do, you know, lots of different things, and they might have different things, and they might be going through hardships and you know, maybe really sad moments, and I see that as a really cool thing. And then later, just when the kid can go to work, encourage them to work in a restaurant where you serve others, and you work in a restaurant, for example, waiting tables, can learn so much, those skills, those social skills, empathy, anticipation towards other person's needs. I just cannot speak highly enough about this kind of work, because it really teaches so much of those skills.
Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing your insight and your advice with our participants and our audience. Join us for our next episode of the Genuine Men's Show podcast and Zoom Lives. Next episode is going to be passion. Share, like, and follow the Genuine Men's Chat on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Join our Genuine Men's Chat Facebook group, and join the men in the discussion on these topics. And remember, our motto in 2020 is many men, many conversations. Have you taken your seat at the table yet?
I was kind of almost like I was born into a world where I was going to go on and become a doctor. Like I have relatives, you know, I knew at the age of 8 or 9 that I have relatives in Pakistan who are doctors. So it was almost like subtly. It's probably not even subtly, you know. I probably don't realize, but I was like being given the messages that, you know, this is what I've got to do. So it was almost like the passions that I had were things that I had to discover myself, and they were almost, it was like a world within you know, it was my own personal world. So I think the first passions I ever developed was my love of comics,